It was a barge. And it was probably dark most of the time in there. And when animals are in darkness, they tend to sleep more. So there probably wasn't as much care as we might think. Not as much. As far as how was Noah taken care of, well, they had food on the ark, like they brought provisions in, but they also had chickens for eggs, and they also had maybe occasional lamb. They had cows for milk, goats for milk, maybe made cheese, so there was a way that they were taken care of on the ark. All right? So, I mean, that's what they were there for. Now this is where it gets a little controversial. What about dinosaurs? How do they fit into this story? And did the flood cover the entire earth, or was it merely a local thing? I'm going to give you a quick answer to this because it's going to lead into the videos I want to show. So I want to spend less time and get to those because I keep putting them off, it seems. And they're a bit long, so I want to make sure that you get the full story. The short answer for me is this. The flood covered the entire earth. It was not a local thing. I don't think you can read the story of Noah and expect it to just be a little local thing. Local meaning like within a few hundred miles of where Noah lived. I think that that's nonsense, personally. Why? Because the whole idea is that the whole world was filled with violence, it says. The whole earth was filled with faithlessness. The whole world was filled with wickedness. So if it was just a local thing, why the drama of this huge boat and a flood doesn't make sense. And especially when Peter analogizes the flood, he talks about it being like baptism. Well, baptism in the word itself means immerse. Baptism in Greek just means to be immersed. Baptizo in Greek, it just means immerse. So in the ancient church, you went under and then you came up. You were completely immersed in water. Okay? And it symbolized a death and a resurrection to new life. It represented your immersion into God by dying to your old nature and rising to new life. That was the purpose of it. Well, this doesn't make sense if this was just a little local flood. Okay? The whole person is immersed in water and comes out of water. Okay? So in the same way, baptism covered the whole earth, cleansed it, and Noah and his family started over again. That's the idea behind it. So I think that that is the short answer to that. And really this whole idea of local flood versus global is a theological debate that you hear amongst mostly evangelical Protestants. Mostly. They debate whether it's a local flood or a global flood more than anyone else. So, in my opinion, if we're talking about a real historical event, I believe it was a universal thing. It covered the whole earth. And here's where, when you see the videos that I will present, I think it will support this idea that it was over the entire world and not just merely a local thing. I heard that some explorers found the Mount Ararat in Turkey. Is that true? Hopefully we'll get to that. And then finally, this other theological element. I don't want to push it, but I want to get right to the second part here that I've been talking about. How did all the world's animals fit, and how did they get there? It is my opinion that we need to talk about how the world, when it was first made, was a unified mass, what geologists call Pangea, or sometimes called Pangaea, depends on how you want to pronounce it, Pangea or Pangaea. And the word simply is Greek. Pan means all or universal, like a pandemic. You've heard of that word? Pandemic is more than just a little thing. It covers everything. It's huge. Okay? Pan is a prefix that means everything. Okay? Pandemonium, that actually is a word that means all demons. If you ever wondered what that is. It's a synonym for hell. But the word itself literally means all and demons. Pandemonium. Something that's pandemonium is this huge outburst, you know, chaos all over the place. So pan is a prefix meaning all. Gaia is the Greek word for earth, like geology or geometry. Geo is another iteration of this word. It just means the earth, physical earth. Okay? So it's all earth. So Pangaea refers to when all of the continents jigsaw puzzled back into one landmass, one super landmass at the beginning of time somewhere. And then over time, they split apart into the continents that we have today. This is what geologists call continental drift. Okay? Now, the question is, what caused it? Now, it is relatively understood by geologists that the tectonic plates on which all of the continents are on were moving and have been moving for hundreds of thousands of years. And as a result, it's broke apart and has split the continents, and they've been drifting apart ever since. And we can actually map the geological stratum of different parts. So if you look at South America and Africa, you can see how they could fit together. Well, as I mentioned before, geologists have taken certain key points along Africa and South America, and they've matched the rock stratum and rock types. So it seems fairly obvious and well supported that the continents were all interlocked together at one point in time. Now, what I would propose is that part of the reason why they split up is because of Noah's flood. I think that that's a primary cause as to what caused the continents to drift. And I'll show you where that comes from. So if that's the case, then all of the animals were on one landmass. So it makes more sense that kangaroos can get onto the ark and all that without having to hop over islands and so forth, and you know, from Australia to there, because if everything was interlocked into one landmass, they all came in one region. And when you interlock all of the continents together and you estimate where approximately Noah's Ark was, it's right in the middle of the world. So it was like in the center of the world of this giant landmass. That was the focal point of this global catastrophe that was about to hit. Now, what about the dinosaurs? Well, I think that it is very possible that some of these creatures managed on board the ark and survived the ark for a series of centuries before they were eventually unable to cope with the new environment that the world was in before the flood and after. I also think that they were hunted by early humans because they were so feared. And the short answer in this reporter's opinion is this: I believe they are the basis of the universality of dragon legends that are also ubiquitous around the world. Every culture has this idea of the dragon, and they look relatively similar to each other. It's this large reptilian-type creature that is ferocious and terrifying. And I think that it's more than just mere mythology. I think that there is a basis for it. And I think the basis was the surviving creatures of dinosaurs during Noah's flood. Okay? You say, well, that's pretty far-fetched, Chip. I don't believe any of that. Well, fine, don't. I don't care. I said it's this reporter's opinion, all right? But I think, again, if we look at some of the oddities in our world, and I mentioned some of them, like the Loch Ness Monster, for example, this helps explain why there are still sightings of these kinds of creatures nowadays, that there's still minor remnants of them that are still alive, and more than likely existed during biblical times even, and even to some things like St. George and the Dragon could have been one of these creatures being killed by St. George. And we call it a dragon, but if because they didn't have the scientific vocabulary that we would have today to describe it. I don't think it's a myth. I think it might have been a real event, but we would call the creature a dinosaur. That's what I'm suggesting. Okay? So, just hold that thought. I want to get to, not that. Hold on. All right, next. There we go. So I want you to see this. I'm not sure if I can connect it. Let me see. Okay. I have a feeling I'm going to have to put this on it because I don't think it's going to pipe through.
To some, the idea of Noah's flood conjures up images from Sunday school Bible stories of a small boat overstuffed with cute animals that gently bobbed in the ocean for 40 days. Many simply call it a myth. Fewer and fewer these days believe the flood account from Genesis 6 to 9.
I need to caveat this little excerpt. This is a, how do I put it? It is a creationist idea of how to reconcile modern science with the Genesis flood, and it's from an evangelical Protestant background. So these are evangelical Protestants that are promoting this. So just keep that in mind. That's your grain of salt. Okay?
Is actual history. The Bible frames the flood as an actual historical event, one that involved a specific family of eight. Genesis says the flood lasted for a full year, engulfed the entire world, and preserved the animals, plants, and humanity from well-deserved judgment. The flood represents the most detailed account of any single event in the Bible. Both the Apostle Peter and Jesus even referred to the Genesis flood as a real historical event. So it's safe to say that the credibility of the Bible, and even Jesus himself, hinges on whether the flood account actually happened as described in Genesis.
And I think that's a good point to make, that we need to keep into mind both Jesus and Peter referred to this event as if it really happened and doesn't even think about it. You know what I mean? So if it's a mere fable or if it's only a moral tale, then why do they treat it that way? That's the big question. And the reason I point this out is because a lot of your modern theologians will discount the whole idea of the flood as mere mythology. It's just a fable. It's a nice story, you know, a little boat bobbing in the ocean, you know, cutesy cutesy, but it has absolutely no basis in reality. It just did not happen, period. Well, if you take that view, then you have to talk to Jesus and Peter. Well, you know, they lived in an era before there was any, they didn't have telephones, they didn't have cars. I mean, everything was superstitious to them. I mean, you know. I have a real problem with that kind of perspective on two levels. One, it presumes that somehow because we have cars and computers that somehow we're smarter than they are. How many in our 20th century have built pyramids 450 feet tall that have lasted over 3,000 years? Right, none. The ancients were just stupid dupes that didn't know anything. The stupid dupes, by the way, in 300 BC knew that the world was round and calculated the circumference of the earth within 1%. This is almost 2,000 years before Columbus sailed around the world. They reasoned that out. How do you know that? Because we have their words. We have their evidence for it. Their calculations. Eratosthenes was the Greek that discovered the circumference of the earth. Calculated it to 1 degree, 1% of accuracy today. Don't tell me the ancients were stupid. Don't tell me the ancients were stupid. It's our arrogance to think that somehow we are smarter than they are. Therefore, oh, poo-poo, poo-poo, poo-poo. You know, it's like, When was the last time our 20th century built a pyramid? Well, you know, no, don't give me that, well, you know. No, stop. No. Answer. I want an answer. Oh, I see. Well, maybe they knew something that we didn't. Second thing I have a problem with these theologians. Second thing I have a problem with, thinking that we're so smart, we know better, is you're attacking Jesus as if he was somehow, he just, you know, he just didn't know better. He was God Almighty in human flesh, but he just simply didn't know any better like we do. You know, I just have a problem with that kind of thought. I just do. Now, it's clear that Jesus didn't know certain things. Oh, yes, he didn't know the day or the hour in which he was going to return. Remember that? No man knows the day or the hour, not even the Son, but the Father only. While he was on earth, he had certain limitations as being human to his knowledge. That's true.
It was self-imposed.
It was self-imposed too, yes. That was part of the incarnation. He had to learn how to speak. He had to learn how to walk. He had to learn his arithmetic, just like everyone else in Hebrew school. And he did that out of willingness. He did that out of deference. But as God, he knew all of that. Now, if he's teaching us spiritual truths, do you think that God would deceive us? No. So if Jesus talked about as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be at the coming of the Son of Man. What do you think he meant by that? Implies that, well, like it was when Noah was alive and well and all of that, blah, 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 right? He's acting as if this is a real event, that Noah was a real person, that the flood actually happened. Well, is he deceiving us because he just didn't know like